I'm so happy to introduce my guest today, Grammy Award-winning composer, arranger, keyboard player, and record producer, Michael Abene. In a prolific career spanning decades, Abene has worked with the biggest names in music. He produced the Grammy-winning projects Digital Duke, featuring the Duke Ellington Orchestra, and the GRP All-Star Big Band, All Blues. He also produced the Grammy-nominated the GRP All-Star Big Band and the GRP All-Star Big Band Live, and received nominations in the arranging category for all three big band recordings. Abene was also nominated for his arrangement of America from Dave Grusin Presents West Side Story. Some artists Abene has arranged, composed, and or produced for are Maynard Ferguson, Maceo Parker, Take Six, Billy Cobham, Eddie Daniels, Borelli Lagrin, Chick Corea, Buddy Rich, Dick Oates, Dizzy Gillespie, the Mel Lewis Jazz Orchestra, Dave Taylor, Patty Austin, the Metropole Jazz Orchestra, the Carnegie Hall Jazz Orchestra, New York Voices, and many, many more. In 2008, Abene arranged, produced, and conducted the music for singer Patty Austin's album Avant Gershwin, celebrating the music of George and Ira Gershwin, and picked up his first Grammy Award for Best Jazz Vocal Album. From 2004 to 2014, Abene was the chief composer and arranger for the WDR Big Band of Cologne, Germany. He's the author of the book Jazz Composition and Arranging in the Digital Age, a book co-authored with Richard Sussman and published by Oxford University Press. Hey, Michael, welcome to the show. You mentioned that you started to play the piano at 6 or 7, and you didn't like the lessons, but you were definitely musical, and
yes.
You said your dad was a guitarist in the Freddie Green tradition, but you also had an aunt who was a very talented boogie-woogie and stride pianist as well, right?
Yeah, couldn't read it. She couldn't read a note of music. She could play. They would play, my father and her, and I had an aunt who was a good singer. And I had an uncle who played drums occasionally, and they would get together, the Italian neighborhood in Brooklyn. The whole family lived in more or less one of the same buildings, and they would just kind of hang out and play and party for a few days. And so I was around this all the time, and I was around the singing, the playing, the fun, with music. That's why today music is fun to me. Because I grew up when music was fun for the family.
Do you have perfect or absolute pitch?
No. In fact, I could tell you could find out sure enough if you hear me sing.
But you have very good ears. So were you listening a lot as a child? And what kind of records did you listen to growing up? And what records had a strong impression on you?
Well, my father, again, had a lot of the Count Basie, Ellington, Louis Armstrong, Benny Goodman. So at a certain point, I can't remember how the transition worked, but I became interested in what all this music looked like on paper, and why does it sound? Why does a musician sound? What are they playing and how are they playing it? So I started to listen to the Basie and all these records my father had, and started to transcribe some of this music on paper, just to practice, to see if any of this was right. And even if I was wrong, I was learning. You know what I'm saying? I was really learning. But he had all those Louis Armstrong. He had some really great records. So that was a great start.
You mentioned that since you didn't know how to read, you self-taught yourself over a summer. Did that come from your piano lessons? You had a little bit of a background, so you would go with that and try to work things out?
Yes. I like I said, I bought sheet music, some of the simple sort of classical piano pieces, and just sight read. I mean, just practice looking at the music, understanding why the rhythms, what were the rhythms were and why they were, and went ahead and just kind of psyched it out. I mean, I was really working hard, let me tell you, to get this together. So I wanted to be in band so hard when I was a kid.
And you did join the Farmingdale High School, and you had a band director, Marshall Brown, who you said was one of the foremost beginning jazz educators, and eventually the school band, which had some great players, began to achieve some notoriety. You said we had all the music written for us: Bill Holman, Ernie Wilkins, Quincy, Bill Russell. So we had all this original music, and I started writing for the band at one point.
Well, there's two different things we're talking about now. The high school band was Marshall Brown, and I wrote my first arrangements when I was 14 or 15 for the band, just to learning the transpositions and everything. Now, at one point, Marshall Brown was, for what I recollect, was fired because he was playing too much jazz with the band.
Oh my gosh.
We played, isn't that, what can I tell you? And then eventually he and George Wein, with the Laurelard family, created the Newport Youth Band, which was the East Coast musicians from all over the East Coast, young players, tons of auditions. And I'll give you some of the names. Great saxophone player Andy Marsala. You had Ronnie Cuba, the saxophonist. Eddie Daniels. Trumpet section, you had Jimmy Owens. And Nat Pavone played with Maynard and Buddy Rich. The bass player was Eddie Gomez. The drummer was Larry Rosen, who became GRP Records. And so that's when Bill Holman, we had Bill Holman, Ernie Wilkins, Bill Russo. They were writing all this material for the band. And also we had two wonderful people rehearsing the band, saxophonist educated John LaPorta and trumpeter Lou Mucci, who played on the Claude Thornhill Band, played on a lot of the Gil Evans stuff. So we had all these great people rehearsing the band. And I think even at that time, I and a number of us got, trying to figure out, jazz education, where's it going? If these two people were part of jazz education at the time, a lot of us became fascinated with where is this going?
Well, Michael, can I jump in and let me ask you, how did you said you got all this original music and your reading had greatly improved. How were you starting to learn from? Did you have a mentor that you tried to shadow, or was it all just yourself just taking their music and trying to figure it out?
Well, I would say John LaPorta was a mentor, an unofficial mentor. In other words, there was in Long Island, there was, I think, the Long Island Jazz Society. They had a very good band. So I would ask Mr. LaPorta, I said, I'd like to write something. He said, yeah, go ahead. So I would write something. And in fact, at the time, I was too young to drive. So my father would drive me around to different rehearsal bands. If I heard of a rehearsal, if there was like 8 tuba players, I would write something for 8 tubas. Anything. No, seriously, anything just to hear the music played. So my father was really terrific in that sense. Just he would take me all over. And people like John LaPorta, people like there was some really good, Bruce Bernard, some really players you never even heard of, were really give me great constructive criticism.
What would they say? Like, give an example of the things they would say to you.
I said, "Why is this?" If it was something I'd say, "Boy, this sounds terrible." So that instead of them saying, "Well, yeah, you're right, go home, it sounds terrible," they would say, "This is why it sounded terrible. You should have put the saxophones this way, or the trumpets this way, or maybe the rhythm part should go this way." There was all this information I was getting, and trying to soak all this information. Then I would go home and then look at what they were saying, look at my music, and say, "Okay, maybe this is what they meant. So I'll try this," and I would bring it back, and try again and again and again till things start to kind of fall into shape with me. And this went on. I fell in love with writing so much at one point. I was not as interested in playing at a certain point as I was in writing. And it really kind of just overtook me.
Michael, did you have a model that you wanted to sound like, or were you trying to strive for an original voice even at a young age?
Well, you never think of trying to be original. You don't know if and when that's going to happen. But I was very influenced by the early arrangers that my father had: Jimmy Monday, Don Redman, of course, Duke Ellington, Billy Strayhorn. So those are my beginning. Fletcher Henderson, all the wonderful things that he did for Benny Goodman. So all those early influences when I was a kid. And then, as I get into it more, there were so many, I was give you an example about being original, just to kind of get off the mark. A wonderful composer, arranger friend, Jim McNeely, and I were teaching at this BMI Jazz Composers Workshop. So one student says, "Well, how do you become original?" And so Jim said, you steal. And in a way, that's kind of true. Duke Ellington didn't wake up and become Duke Ellington, and Gil Evans didn't wake up and become Gil Evans or Mingus. You kind of absorb things, and you hopefully at some point shape them into your own thing. But you don't. It's like, I'm going to sit down and write a hit song. You don't know what's going to be a hit song. You don't know what you're going to end up as a composer or arranger, because you're absorbing all these things and hopefully creating something of your own, which you don't know this. You just try stuff and listen. You say, well, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. And, right now my favorites would be, I would say, Billy Strayhorn, Ellington, Gil Evans, and George Russell would be my first top. But there's so many people.
Now that you were living in Long Island, you went to these rehearsals, did you also want to go out and watch these live big bands, the professionals that were playing? Did you see a lot of live music as a kid?
Yeah, pretty good amount, because there was a club in Westbury, Long Island called the Cork and Bib. And during the weekdays, they had local musicians with some good players. So I would go over there and listen to these people. On the weekends, they'd have the name performers. I would go there and listen to the name performers. And there were a lot of little jazz clubs that I would go and listen to the people. Sometimes Marshall Brown took some of the students from the high school band or the Newport Youth Band. I went down and remember hearing Mingus with that wonderful group he had with John Handy and Horace Parwan. Went to hear Basie's band in person. So we were exposed to a lot of really interesting music. And eventually the funny thing is I got to play all these clubs. It was really interesting. The original Birdland, the original Half Note down on Hudson Street in New York. But it was a lot of music. And again, I was listening to music at home, buying records, classical, buying the scores to some of the classical pieces, figuring out what the heck, why does this sound so good? Why is it sounding good? And at the time, there weren't a lot of jazz scores being published at that time. And it was funny. It just absorbed a lot of music, played with some very interesting people. Clark Terry, when I was still a teenager, a wonderful trumpet player, Don Ellis, who eventually moved out to the West Coast and had this wonderful, interesting big band playing Indian-oriented music. And but I had all these people around me. It was just great. There was an area in Long Island. I would play with people like saxophone played, Selden Powell played with Basie. Oliver Nelson was living out at that same area. Jimmy Nottingham, the trumpet player, Clark Terry, Billy Mitchell, a tenor player for Basie and Dizzy Gillespie's band. So I would play with all these people, and that was my education.
Did you also go out to New York City? Did you travel out there to see what was like in New York City, the main Manhattan Island?
Sure. So I went to original Birdland when I was a kid. Then eventually, like I said, I played there. Went to the original Half Note down on Hudson Street. Played there as a kid. Went to the 5 spot to hear somebody. Eventually played there. But I would go in the city all the time. At that time, it was no problem. Friends, we would go in. And like I said, Marshall Brown also took us in to make sure we heard a lot of these people live. Again, it's the incredible education.
Can you describe a vivid experience that you still remember of this time, maybe a performance or meeting of somebody like an Oliver Nelson? Or what experience really stood out to you that you can remember that was pretty formative to your development?
I think it's a very hard question because there were so many things. And it's hard to pinpoint, but one, it's like saying, give me one piece of music that influenced you. That's hard. Give me, a name an artist. I mean, when I went to see Mingus, I always wanted to play with Mingus, for instance. And then years later, I was offered a gig with Mingus, which I didn't take. But it's very hard. I mean, seeing the thing I was impressed most of it because of my wanting to write was going to hear a big band. Going to hear Buddy Rich's band or Basie or Ellington, and then the Maynard Ferguson band, which eventually joined. But hearing the impact, just to go hear the impact of 18 guys playing was an enormous influence on me as a writer, especially. I'm speaking from a writer standpoint. From a player standpoint, I mean, there's so many guys I like Duke's playing. I like Jackie Byard. I like Bud Powell. I like, you name it. I like all those people. There's always something to get from any performer, I feel. You learn something all the time.
Well, it's interesting when you mentioned Jackie Byard. That was a pianist you replaced on was it the Maynard Ferguson band?
Yeah. In fact, he was, when I was playing with trumpeter Don Ellis, John had the quartet, and Jackie was also an alto saxophone player. Jackie would come to rehearsal, and they would play. We would all play. And I think Don Ellis was studying with Jackie at the time. So Jackie mentioned to me, hey, you want to leave Maynard's band? You have interest in coming on a band? And of course, I was like 18 or 19. I said, yeah. I mean, I was the hot band at the time for young players. And so I said, man, definitely, And so I had written some charts previous to that. So when I started the gig with Maynard, I started bringing in some of those charts and redoing it for Maynard's approach. And it was a blast. I mean, the first gig I had was a dance gig in Buffalo, and the second gig I had was three weeks at Birdland. So, and Maynard had to deal with Birdland. We worked so many weeks a year. So we'd go in there, and it was just fun working with the band and meeting all these other people and getting the exposure. A lot of people knew me. Some of the musicians knew because they had seen me, with Don Ellis or other situations. And I wasn't a total stranger to the scene because I was still, like I said, a teenager. And working with the band was great. I mean, working with Maynard was terrific.
You said, I was always never really happy with any of the records, first of all, and just the recording quality. It was only one record that I felt that the band really sounded good was a thing called The Blues Roar. Can you talk about that, about the recordings?
Well, most of the things when I first joined the band, we were on Rootlight Records. And, we did some good recordings. It's just that the sound quality I wasn't crazy about. Even from, when the band was live, it was such an exciting band live. And a lot of times, I don't know if it was captured like that on recordings for maybe a number of reasons. It could have been, the situation, the studio, whatever. The Blues Roar, I personally, I felt was sound-wise was good. And I thought I was, pretty happy with the arrangements I did. It was an expanded band. We had, instead of the normal 4 saxes, we had 5 saxophones. We had 4 trombones, French horns, tuba, harp. It was like the A-team of New York studio musicians. With some of the original members of the band were on, but then it was enlarged. I just felt it was a nice feeling in the studio. And there was another record called Color Him Wild, which I was pretty happy with the charts. But I think the overall ambiance on that particular recording, I felt the most comfortable with. A great rhythm section beside myself, Mel Lewis on drums, Barry Galbraith on guitar, and Richard Davis on bass. Man, I didn't have to do anything. I just had to look good.
Can I ask you a question about modernism? And there was a period of great change in jazz in the 60s and coming out of bebop. There was hard bop. And did you ever feel like you wanted to be modern in your harmonies? And you obviously came out listening to Fletcher Henderson and the Benny Goodman records. And what was the aesthetic taste that was on the scene at the time? And were you what kind of sound were you going for? Was there a compulsion to be more modern at the time?
Well, again, in the learning process, yes, I always wanted to do better. What you wanted to, if you wanted to call coming out of one type of writing, again, as I so-called matured, my writing also matured, and different elements came into my head and different elements came into my writing. Different voicings, different approach to harmony. Influenced a lot by the certain sound. Like I love that Birth of the Cool sound. I liked the Gil Evans sound. I also liked some of the more extreme modernism of some of the Bill Russo music from the late 40s with Ken. Bob Granger, City of Glass. There was so much. As I kept writing, I kept finding things that I liked and taking more and more risks too. I think you have to take chances. I'd rather be go down fighting than play it safe. Wrong and strong approach.
Right. Now, what's astonishing is that you self-taught yourself harmony and how to really do all of these things. Now, let me ask you, how did you do that? How did you teach yourself the harmony and the theory? Did somebody explain to you things? Did you ask questions? Did you infer it from the scores that you studied?
A variety of things by asking a lot of questions, like again to like the gentleman mentioned earlier, John LaPorta. Also looking at scores too. You just you get really inquisitive. You say, well, how does this sound, and what does this sound look like on paper? You try to figure out. Sometimes with the classical scores, some of the like Beethoven, you hear something. It sounds marvelous, man. You get the score and it's a triad. I'm saying, oh my God. And the triad sounded good is because he had certain instruments playing certain notes. Maybe if those instruments didn't play those certain notes, that grouping, it wouldn't sound as good. And it's the same thing. It's like, as I kept writing and writing, I'm figuring out senses of balance between instruments and sections. And you start to mess around. You mess around in a sense of woodwind doubles. You mess around with mute doublings and brass doublings, rather.
So there's a real trial and error process where you would actually need the live musicians there. Would you test out the voicings on the piano? And are there some limitations to hearing it on the piano?
I don't. Yes, there is, but I don't. When I'm writing, the piano is not the piano. It's the orchestra or the band. It's not the piano. And when I write a score, it's always transposed. I never wrote a concert score in my life. In fact, it's harder for me to read a concert score than it is a transposed score, because I've done it. It's just so automatic to me. When I'm writing, I'm hearing the instrument in the key that it plays in, whether it's the E-flat instruments, B-flat instruments, whatever. But when I'm writing on the piano, it's not the piano. I've written away from the piano many times. But, Jim McNeely and I feel the same way. It's nice to sit down and just kind of, noodle around. I mean, I might play a passage, half hour, an hour, and 2 hours, just trying moving one note here and one note there until I find something that sort of locks into my head. And I just go for it. I mean, I really think in terms of colors and certainly rhythms, and I just do it. I mean, since I was a kid, I would just try something. Again, if it didn't work, I'd go figure out why it didn't work. Or somebody would help me to understand why it didn't work.
Can I ask you about those transposed scores? What are the advantages? Like, if you were to teach this to a student, would you recommend that they do transposed scores or learn concert scores? What's your advice in this regard?
Well, in working with a lot of young, composers, the level of the writing is fine. What they'll do, they'll come in with a concert score on a computer. On a MIDI, in other words, I still do my scores by hand. I don't use a computer to do my scores. So they'll come in with the score and in a MIDI track, and they will play it. And the MIDI track is not that great. Everything sounds good on the MIDI track, and then you try to explain to them how the humans are going to play this. Then I'll say to them, well, you got a concert score. I want you to go and write a transposed score for me. And what they do is they push the E-flat button on the computer, and it becomes an E-flat part. And I said, that's not exactly what I'm saying. You really need to hear what the instrument sounds like in your head. In other words, like, for instance, what I tell students sometimes, if they'll ask me a question, say about the trumpet, I'll say, you want to understand the trumpet more, go get with the trumpet player. Tell him to bring all his mutes, bring a little tape recorder, have him tape all the sound of his mutes, get the sound of the different mutes in your head. When you go with the trombone players, do the same thing, get their mutes, tape everything, start to get the sound of what the different mutes and what their registers are. Woodwinds too, you get the sound of what the basic saxophones are, and what if you want to know what the bass clarinet sounds like, get together with the bass clarinet player, really, and pick their brain. I mean, pick their brain. You kind of really be a serious student. You're asking people who know their instrument, talking to you about what the instruments go for, and then you start. I found out by learning all this, trying to say, well, gee, what if I put one trumpet open and one trumpet in cup mute played with a trombone that's in a cup mute, and two soprano saxophone players. What is it going to sound like? I'll try it. I'll just try mixing the colors up, but that's the only way you're going to find out. Sometimes even to this day, I'll look at something and say, the balance is kind of off. Don't play in the mute. Play this kind of mute. I mean, how do you explain that? You explain it to somebody, but they got to know, they got to try it.
I'd like to ask you a very general question first. What is the Michael Abene arranging process?
That's a good question. If I knew it, I would. Excuse me. No, generally I sit down and I look at a piece of music, whether it's an existing piece, my own composition, or a Wayne Shorter tune or whatever. I will sit there and treat it all as my own composition, figure out rhythmically what I'm going to do. How can I reharmonize something? Just right now, sometimes I use a lot of scrap paper before I go into score paper. I use tons of scrap paper, just write down all kinds of rhythm ideas, harmonic ideas, even, sort of a plan, like, hey, I'm going to have 3 trumpets and the trombone play the melody here. I'm going to have this happening here, and then I'm going to have these kind of backgrounds, kind of, to lay out some kind of a mental score, and then start to figure out, take all these ideas. Now, for instance, sometimes I write a piece where there's no real harmony. So, all right, so then that's a whole other structure. I'm not reharmonizing something that doesn't have harmony. Or I'm taking it, like I say, a standard or a Wayne Shorter tune. I'll sit with that and try to reharmonize it, try to make it more interesting. So, so somebody wants to write a chart on autumn leaves, I'll say, if you're going to write a chart on autumn leaves, you really better come up with something really interesting. I'd rather see you really fall on your face trying something than come in with the 10,000th version of Autumn Leaves. We had enough of that. So it's just a process. It's hard to explain, but I'm very when I write, it's like tunnel vision. My whole house could fall down as long as it doesn't hurt my paper and the piano. I don't, but you know what I'm saying. It's just.
So how do you grapple with form then? So what's foremost in your mind when you're thinking of the overall form of the piece?
How to break the form. How to. Really, in other words, when I'm working on something, whether it's, say, the 16-bar phrase, for instance, I'm writing, I have some great ideas, and I do this, I'm saying, oh, gee, this sounds good. I write a phrase, and all of a sudden it's, instead of 16 bars, it's maybe 19 and a half bars. Why? I'll tell students, when you look at a phrase and you're writing something, don't worry about counting the amount of bars. Go write the phrase, and, then when you finish, you say, oh, how about that? It's 19 and a half bars. Don't even think about it. So that all of a sudden you're working on the form. You're breaking the form of the piece. And so, what I'm saying? You're not worrying about an AABA form anymore. Sometimes I'll work on something and it'll be a 3/8 bar, the 4/4 piece. There'll be a 7/4 bar, a 9/8 bar. It's just, if I'm hearing something, I just let it happen. I don't try to cut myself off because I'm supposed to. In terms of, same thing of reharmonization. You can reharmonize this note and that note and that note and that note. It sounds great, but you put them all together, it sounds terrible because you're thinking note at a time. You're not thinking of, here's the beginning of the phrase and here's the end of the phrase. How's it going to sound as a whole?
Let me ask you about integrating players, because you really constantly work with the best musicians in the world, playing on your recordings and your productions. Do you think of the player as you're making the arrangement, or are you thinking like, okay, I have this player, I know the strengths of that particular player, and that's going to really affect the arrangement? Or do you just think of, I want this to be timeless, that anyone could really just dive into?
It could work. The biggest advantage I had when I was working with the WDR band in Cologne, Germany, I was there basically for 11 years. And so you got to know all the players, and certain solos, which guys solos better on what type of music. The saxophone section was incredible because there were so many doubles that I had so many colors with the saxophone section. It was just wonderful. And, you get spoiled because when you go to play some of this music with another band, these saxophone players do not have that kind of amount of doubles. And so I was able to get so much color from the band. Also, I got to know the players. Like I said, I know who is the better funkier player, who's the better bebopper, which trumpet players played this kind of a ballad, and how this trumpet player was playing a ballad, but he played differently. So you really got to know, to everybody in the band, and it was great, and you really get spoiled like that. It's a wonderful sense of being spoiled. But the problem is when you go with other bands, they may be great bands, but you're not writing for that band, but they still play the music well. But in your heart, you've written it to this kind of person and that kind of person. It's a great feeling. It's a great feeling to hear the music, period. But especially when who you've written it for originally, It's great.
How do you determine if something swings? Can you describe it technically?
Something swings. It's like, what is jazz? I have no idea what jazz really is. They say jazz is improvisation. Well, country music is improvisation. Classical music is improvisation. I don't know. I know some like Stone Cold beboppers, when I would do R&B and funk pieces, they say, well, man, that's not jazz. It's not swinging. I think it's swinging. There's some great funk and R&B, like people like Maceo Parker you mentioned. I mean, that stuff is swinging. I mean, sometimes I tell students, I say, I'd rather read a good funk R&B fusion gig than a swing jazz feel, because it's a level of it's the material that helps you too. Don't forget, it's the material that helps you. Sometimes you have people say, I hated that song until I heard your arrangement. That's a wonderful compliment to me. But I have equal amounts of fun in all kinds of music. Is the point.
What about the writing for the drums? Do you, because for a lot of amateurs, it's just slashes. But like for you, like what's important in writing for the rhythm section, the drummer and the bass player, and what's your take on that?
Well, the basic drum parts I write are fairly simple. I write the basic figures, or I write the basic groove. So, funk R&B type groove, and if you're playing with the right guys, they know what to play. And even if they're not sure, you play the chart and they'll kind of fall into the groove. Bass players, if it's an upright player, I will write bass lines out when it's necessary. When it's not necessary, I write the chord changes and let the bass player, play. If you have a good bass player, he'll know what to do with those chord changes. Same with guitar and piano. A lot of times I'll write out a lot of piano parts. And where it's really necessary. Same thing with guitar. My rhythm section parts, I think are pretty well laid out. With a drummer, especially, you get a player like a Mel Lewis, he sees a lot of figures, he'll know what not to play. I tell the drummer, I say, don't play all the figures. They're just basically references. Listen to the chart, pick out what you might think are the important figures to play. It's not important for me to drum that catches every figure. That's a common problem with drummers who are not experienced in the big band. I say, listen to Mel Lewis, man. You write 100 figures, he'll play about 5 of them. But I'm serious. I'm really funny with rhythm sections, because don't forget, if the rhythm section is not cool, the rest of the band is not going to be cool, basically. No matter what kind of music you're playing, if the groove ain't there, the groove ain't there. And the groove ain't there could be happening on all kinds of music.
As a very prolific teacher as well, I'm sure a lot of your students did not grow up in the way that you did, in the sense that they got to hear a lot of live players rehearsing their material as much. So what are the common mistakes that new arrangers make that perhaps you, with your experience and your background, are able to identify? Because just the way it is in the modern age, they don't learn how people used to traditionally learn this music.
Well, first of all, while we're talking about, for one of the people that we've been talking about, Gary McFarlane, just back up for a second. I think he was probably one of them, if he had lived longer, he was at the point he was probably getting to be very influential. I feel I've learned a lot from working with Gary. And what it's one of the things with arrangers is, first of all, their sense of reharmonization, which is very difficult for me to teach somebody how to reharmonize, because I think it all comes from your ear. And the other thing is like when you're writing dynamics, people sometimes will be doing a score and I'll say, well, what dynamic level do you want to play? Well, I don't know. Well, I'll say, may not always be there where your chart's being played. Like sometimes I'll be writing something for Metropole Orchestra in Holland. I won't be there. I have to send my score over. So I said, you got to be really, you really got to think in terms of phrase marks, dynamics, be sure of your colors. I'll look at the colors. I'll say, well, this is not going to sound good because you're going to have too much weight on this note and not enough weight on this other note. And, you have to explain, you really have to get into, I think I'm pretty good at that kind of a thing. My biggest fun is working with private students and working with combos. But the private ones I really have a great time with, and I love picking the music apart and like saying these things to them. Well, this is not going to sound good. Why? And I'll explain to them, well, this note needs to be fortified. This note, you're going to have too much, it's going to be too bottom heavy, too top, there's no balance. You know, writing backgrounds is a whole issue too. What do you do when you're writing backgrounds? You know, and I try to explain, well, as a pianist, you're accompanying somebody. As an arranger, behind the soloist, you're accompanying the soloist. So you have to figure out things that you're going to sort of kick the soloist in the behind, and at the same time, when you're writing, you're leading and you're following at the same time. So it's a hard thing to explain, but it's a matter of time and patience and experience.
How do you get a big band to have the flexibility of a small group? You've mentioned that Bill Holman was someone who was able to do this. It's
a hard thing. I think Gil Evans had that thing where his saxophone sections were never really saxophone sections, all basically woodwinds. And he'd have like 8 brass, and it never sounded like a big band in that sense. Holman, it's the way Holman orchestrated. I mean, it's not how you do it. He's got his way of doing it, and that's what I always loved about Bill Holman, is that he can make that big band sound like a small group. A lot of times people would say, well, if he's got a big band, why doesn't it sound like a big band? Because it does sound like a big band. It's just that it's not the same idea. About maybe 3 years ago, I did a project with Dave Lieben, Adam Nussbaum, and Steve Swallow. They had a group called We Three. And we did the project with the WDR Band. There was no keyboards, no guitar. And I wrote everything. It reminded me, I didn't plan it to come out like that, but everything was mid-range. There was no screaming high trumpets. And it almost sounded more like a Birth of the Coolish, mild West Coast-ish kind of sound. It's a beautiful music that Swallow wrote. I wrote a couple of pieces of Liebman's. And it just happened, and I still think it's one of the better projects that I've written. Had that small group, big band feel, where it had transparency. You know, there wasn't a lot of really thick voicings and, you know, bottom heavy stuff. Just had this nice floating thing. And I like that style of writing. I mean, I obviously can and have to write in your face kind of stuff, which also is fun too. But the music they presented me, I felt this was the way I felt it had to be presented. And that's the way I went with it. It's just, I love that sound. That's why when I was a kid and I heard the Birth of the Cool, I was drawn to the West Coast players at the time because I felt there was more orchestration involved in some of those West Coast recordings with Shelly Manne and Bob Cooper and Bobby Andervolson. There was a group, and Holman small group stuff. Even the Dave Pell Octet, I don't know if you remember anything like that. It was a very popular, published charts. Great group. I was the 18 on the West Coast. You know, I think it was 4 horns and 4 rhythm. And all the writers were writing. It had this really wonderful sound, fun music to play, always made sense. Holman's got that thing translated to a big... Jerry Mulligan with his concert jazz band. Great example. Whereas a big band, but it had that kind of energy and small group feeling, you know, which I really like.
How have you grown as an arranger over the years? If you were to compare yourself to the Michael Abene of 10, 20 years ago, what's different?
God, I would say, you know, that's a hard question. Hopefully, because I was getting more mature with age, but I like to think of the obvious answer, but I don't know. I think one of the things I got more involved with, which helped maybe with the big band writing, was I was starting to write some more for orchestra. And I think, you know, when you're writing for orchestra, you sometimes think differently for a big band and vice versa. So I don't know. I think I like to think I'm taking more chances. I like to think I'm spending more time on my own compositions, which I always, you know, was so involved working on other people's music. And I like to think in the last, you know, 10 years or so, I'm trying to work on more original pieces and also more extended pieces, not just a chart, but an extended piece, you know, original compositions for orchestra or big band that are not like, I got rhythm changes or have my own. Some of them have no harmony, but just more extended works. I'd like to do even more of that.
Yeah, that's a great segue, because I did want to ask about your compositional process. Do you start with the piano, and does it come first in your mind? Does the melody come first, the form, or the harmony? What is your compositional process?
Sometimes it's rhythmic ideas. When I sit down to piano, I'll have a rhythmic idea in my mind, and I will start just plunking out single notes, either in the right hand or the left hand. Maybe the compositional idea might start with a bass idea in the left hand. And so then maybe I'll add some notes in the right hand. Now, we're not talking harmony yet. So I'll put these elements together, and then I'll try to find some harmony. And it's great, because when I work by a note here and a note in the left hand, and I put a piece together, X amount of bars. I have no idea how long what's going to happen yet. I'll start to find some interesting harmony to it. Sometimes I'll say, well, this section would be harmony, this section's not harmony. So I'll start having some kind of basic idea on manuscript paper, and I'll say, okay, now I've got this amount of music. How am I going to orchestrate this? Then I start this whole process of looking at this manuscript paper with all these bunch of little dots in the left hand and the right hand and rhythmic ideas. All right, what am I doing? How can I shape this into something? Excuse me, shape this into something. And then I start to actually try to make sense out of all these little things that I've kind of thrown on a piece of paper. Excuse me. And that's basically that's how I start. I mean, whether it's even for an orchestra. Sometimes I'll look at a piece and I'll say, well, how am I going to start this piece? And I'll start something with totally no harmony and go into a section where you suddenly have this rich harmony, original harmony, but, I don't know.
Let's take an example then. So, for instance, it could be Odyssey for brass, which was performed by the Metropole Jazz Orchestra. Could you maybe take that as an example, and how did you make that tune? What was the process for that?
Same thing, first of all, the gentleman at the time who ran the orchestra, Fritz Bands, asked me to write a piece for the orchestra. So I didn't know what to do. I mean, you're saying, okay, what do I do? So one of my thoughts, since the brass section was and still is incredible brass section they had. And so I said, okay, I'm going to write something for brass, So I started and also I had the strings and the woodwinds and everything there, in my use. I would start, again, basic ideas, listening, knowing how the brass players, I knew some of the brass players there, and I knew how they played. And, okay, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to try this and that. Again, thinking in terms of writing for brass, not orchestra. So if I'm writing for brass, is the focal point, and everything else is an accompaniment. So I came up with all these rhythmic things, clusters of sound. It started to build. It took me a while to do this. It wasn't like, it didn't write itself, that's for sure. And it was something I worked on and kept adding to the texture, coming to a point, okay, if you listen, there's a point where there's a bass figure that the string, it gets passed back and forth with the strings and the woodwinds, I forget offhand. And the brass are starting to react to this. They're starting to react. There's no harmony. Some of them are doing sections in a wah-wah mute. Some are playing open. Then you have them playing, interesting just sounds, not even notes. And that was one performance. There was a few other performances of it. That's the only one I had. And it's just started, so they were feeding off what I wrote underneath them. A lot of it was written. Some of it was not written. It was just like a rhythm. So I said, play this rhythm. You two guys play this rhythm. You two guys play this other rhythm. You, first of all, play this rhythm. And I just let them go for it. And it was a lot of it was improvised, and they would go where you didn't know which was improvised and which was written, because they would come in and out of it. And because due to the fact that they were such good players, I felt it made it work. I would love to perform this piece again. I have the score and the parts here. I'd love to have it played again.
How do you choose the instruments that you choose for your pieces? What drives because the music is the music, but you have such a knowledge of orchestration that how they sound on different instruments. But what makes you make that ultimate decision to choose a particular instrument?
Well, that is a process that I sometimes you hear it. I hear it pretty much right away. And sometimes I just sit there and kind of play it on the piano, play the thoughts on piano. And that's why I'll start with on manuscript paper. I'll sit there and say, I'll write something. I'll say, maybe I want is a solo instrument playing the melody. As I think about it more, no, it's the whole process of, a lot of times when I work on a section, I work on a section 2 or 3 or 4 different ways as far as orchestrating it. And sometimes I will wind up going back to my first idea. Sometimes I will take something from the first idea and find something in the third idea that works, that I can put together. But the whole idea of, again, when I'm playing on the piano, it's not the piano, it's different instruments. I just have not determined what my final decision as to who's going to play this particular idea yet. I'm still not sure. I'm still fooling around with it in my head.
So I want to talk about another one. For instance, PFP, which is a piece for Paquito de Rivera. Now, that's a clarinet. He's a wonderful musician, multi-instrumentalist. Now, you obviously had the clarinet in mind. Now, how does that affect the harmony, the melody? He's obviously a famous Latin musician, jazz as well, but he does all sorts of styles. So how does it all play into the composition?
Well, knowing how Paquito plays, I don't say I've always bet 1,000, but knowing how he played, and I know he's capable of reacting to what you play because he has a good harmonic sense beside a rhythmic sense, that I had this melody in mind as a starter. And then as that particular A melody happened, he really has this warm sound. And it's getting him into this, and when he starts the melody, it's really pretty. And from that initial melody, I wound up doing variations of that melody, ending up with this really wild, kind of Latin montuno thing at the end. A lot of it was written, but a lot of it was improvised. It was a very difficult piece because he played a lot. He was playing a lot of the time. Knowing his playing, I know I could get away with a lot of stuff with him. He would, like I said, he would react. It's fun when you work with an artist that reacts to what you write, and he's one of them. And it just started off with this one melody. And then as I kept writing, I kept taking variations of this melody, putting it into a different perspective, a different orchestration point of view, because I had big band, 18 musicians and a full symphony orchestra. So I had a lot of colors, and maybe one section would be just strings. One section would be woodwinds and strings. One section would be woodwinds from the band and woodwinds from the orchestra. So I had so many colors, and he just, I would probably, if I was writing for Joe Lovano, I might do things somewhat differently, knowing how they play. But with Paquito, I know he's got it all covered. He's got the pretty covered, and he's got the swinging covered.
When you get a virtuoso like that, like for instance Borelli Legrand, what a guitarist he is, and when you were doing Djangology, is less more? So do you want to step back and let the artist shine in a big way? You mentioned Paquito would play a lot. So how would you balance that, the virtuosity of the artist and also the balance between the arrangement and the artist?
Well, a lot of times, excuse me, when we'll do things, this will probably happen more with the big band, but I have had it happen with orchestras where I'll have a section which is just open. Or let the guy play for a while. Let him play. Whether it's Paquito. When we did some of the big band stuff at Paquito, we did, I would get to a point, just let him play a couple of choruses. Let him, make it now it sounds like a small group with him playing and then bringing the backgrounds, bringing you different colors. Same with Lovano. But the orchestra, we did it in a couple of pieces with Paquito that are not part of the same project. With Joe Lovano, we did with the Symphonica project. When we did the concerts, we opened up some of the music, let the guy play a little bit. In other words, so I'm saying, all right, I'm not stepping on it. Right? He has all this written stuff to play now. It gets a chance to play on his own. So then when I come back in with my orchestra or big band, they're grooving really hard, so they're going to just keep playing, and the orchestra will then sound like it'll sound like one whole piece, not like, okay, here's the written section, here's the solo section, and here's the ending section, and never the twain shall meet. It's still going to sound like one whole piece. I do that with a lot of the players, with Liebman, with Abercrombie, Schofield. You set them up, you let them groove on the melody with all the written stuff, and then they go to play. And then you start letting them play, and then you start sneaking in the band or the orchestra again. And it's not like in the old days when the band played, the soloists would play like a 16-bar chorus, 16 bars, and that's it,
Yeah.
So I like to hear the guys. I personally like to hear the guys play. I mean, when I was on Maynard's band, he let the guys play. He opened up the charts. And you play, and then you bring in the band, and everybody's happy,
I want to ask about Patti Austin's album Avant Gershwin, which you arranged, produced, and conducted in 2008, and won the Grammy for Best Jazz Vocal Album. Now, explain how that came about, how you took that music and put your own arrangement and your own twist on it, and working with Patti.
Well, first of all, I met Patti. I was doing a lot of jingle dates in New York in the 60s and 70s, writing and playing keyboards on dates. And that's where I met Patti. Patti was probably one of the busiest singers, studio singers in New York at the time. And great attitude. It's fun working with her. When we talked about this project, we got together, picked the material. We decided, well, we're going to do I think it was an I Got Rhythm kind of a thing. Then we were going to do a medley of Porgy and Bess. We picked the basic material, we picked tempos, and after that, she just left it up to me, to be honest with you. I played something, she said, I like that tempo, let's do that tempo. And then I just went home and started writing and started thinking of Patti's singing in my head and start writing.
How long did it take to put all of those arrangements together?
I really can't remember. I really can't remember. It was, I don't know. All I know is I had a lot of fun working on that with her. And I think it's a very good, there's 2 or 3 tracks that we didn't use because of the time element that were really good. But it was some nice things on there. I mean, but again, she's fun. She's a lot of fun and obviously great music to work with. And so it was nice. Some of it wasn't all orchestra. Some of it was with strings, and some of it was just big band. But she just brings an exuberance to the music. She's so flexible and so she's got great. They talk about a groove. She has a great groove, Patti, and so I enjoy working with her. But it was a really labor of love project, and we were both very excited and happy. Because we both had been nominated many times, and and it was like, oh my God, we got a Grammy. How about that? She was just as surprised as anybody. But we've worked on a couple others. An Ellington project that we did with the WDR Band, which unfortunately is not is still going through some kind of problems. Great project with Patti with the big band. Really some great music. And I love working with singers, by the way. Kurt Ellie and Diane Reeves, great Dutch singer, Faye Klaassen. I like working with singers, too, a lot. I have a thing about that.
Michael, I want to end off with some fun questions, kind of like hot seat questions. These are just fun, not serious. So I'm going to ask you what your top 3 this and that is, and just whatever comes to mind. I'd love to hear what you have to say. So I want to start off with who are your top 3 trumpet players?
Oh, trumpet players. I would say Dizzy, Miles. That's a hard one. You get the third. I don't know. Tom Harrell.
What about top 3 saxophone players?
Well, you got to leave you got to put Bird and Sonny Rollins in there. And after that, it's hard. Lee Konitz. I mean, that's a rough question, man. We said you name the 15 favorites. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. How about top 3 drummers?
Mel Lewis, Elvin, Philly Joe. I can't. That's hard because I think of Steve Gadd and those kind of guys too. Buddy,
Yeah. How about top 3 guitar players?
I love Barella the Grand, Jim Hall, Schofield for starters.
And how about top 3 keyboard or piano players?
Oh my God. Well, I'm not going to say chick or her because that's my peer group. I'm talking about, before that, like a Monk Bud Powell. I can go back and people like Teddy Wilson, who was my first influence.
Right.
But, you got to say Chick and Herbie.
Yeah.
What can I tell you? Maybe make it 5 in this category.
Yeah.
So.
This is tough. What are the top 3 big bands?
I would say Ellington, Gil Evans, George Russell, when he did have a big band together. I would go there, although I like that. Benny Goodman.
It's getting hard now. Top 3 big band arrangers.
Oh, my God. Ellington, Strayhorn, Gil Evans.
And let's switch to classical. Who are your top 3 classical composers?
Well, Bela Bartok. I like the Bartok. I like some of the, of course, Chopin. It's hard. Beethoven. That's harder than the jazz guys.
How about jazz composers? You mentioned Ellington and Strayhorn. Who are your top 3 composers for jazz?
Boy, I would say again Ellington, Strayhorn. That's again Gil Evans. Although he's not to me, he's not a composer, but everything he touches, it sounds like he wrote it.
Yep.
It's a hard one. That's a tricky one.
Now, you've had such a great career and you've known so many wonderful people. Who are some arrangers or composers who are not popularly known, but in your opinion, really should be better known?
Gary McFarland. Let me think now. Certainly Gary. I would say some of the names you already know. I'm not saying Brick Ring of That because they're obviously well known. I would say Bill Russo. Who's just another one I was mentioning to the students? George Russell. Nobody knows this guy. Nobody knows Gary McFarland. You got to throw Al Cohn in there too.
Yeah.
You know I'm going to get hell from a lot of say, well, why didn't you mention this guy and that guy? I'll say you have to call this guy up and blame it on him.
What's your favorite instrument or section to write for?
Woodwinds. Saxophone section with woodwind doubles.
Okay, this is a 2-part question. What's your biggest regret in music, and what's your proudest musical moment?
I don't know. My biggest regret is that I didn't write better when I was a kid, and I haven't gotten to the proudest yet. I've gotten pretty close. I haven't got the proudest moment yet. I'm still working on that part.
If you could work with anyone in history that you haven't worked with before, anyone in history, who would it be?
Oh my God! Let me see. Give me a second about that one. Who I haven't ever worked with? I would probably say Miles because of the sound that you can get away with behind him. I mean, I love this sound, but I love that combination of Miles and Gil, and I mean, it's hard. That's really hard. That's even harder than the classical guys.
Now, if someone in my audience heard this interview and was really excited to dive into your work, what 3 albums of yours would you recommend that they start with?
Well, as a kid, I would say Color Him Wild. The Blues Roar with Maynard. Probably the Joe Lovano Symphonica record on Blue Note. That's for sure. And I'm trying to think of another one that I actually like. Hold on. But certainly the Lovano Symphonica record is really good. But that's with Symphony Orchestra. And boy, oh boy. That's a very good question. It's really hard. I would say maybe the Bill Evans record called Van's Joint, a fusion record, nice record, good record. It's hard. We did the Steps Ahead record. I don't know. But for sure, the 2 I would say to start with is the Blues Roar and Lovano Symphonica.
It's been such a great hour to be able to talk with you, and I really learned so much. It's really fantastic to be able. It's such an honor to talk to you. And my final question would be, if somebody wanted to be a better arranger or composer, what's the best piece of advice you could give that person?
Keep writing, keep hearing it played. As soon as you write something, go out and get it played. Concentrate when you're writing, patience. Forget about everything else when you're writing except what you're writing. As soon as you finish something, go out and have it played immediately, as soon as you can, because unless you don't hear it back at you, you're really not going to be sure. People, it's good to have that feedback. It's good to hear musicians playing your music. That's how I learned. If I could write 20 charts. If I never heard them, I would never know what would be happening in my life if I never heard any of that stuff. I mean, it's really important and patience. Got to have a lot of patience and keep listening.
The great Michael Abene, thank you so much for coming on the show and really educating my audience, educating me, sharing your experiences. Really, you're one of the greats, and it was such an honor to talk to you. I hope you had a good time talking to me and the questions, and I really would like to talk to you again soon in the future. Thank you so much, Michael.
Thank you very much for having me. And, I gave you some long answers, man. I guess you can edit some of this.
No, I'm going to keep everything.
Oh, man, I'm in trouble. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much, Michael.